Imagine yourself standing atop a Sahara dune, the hot wind lifting sand beneath your feet. Before you, the horizon stretches endlessly, blending the golden yellow of the desert with a deep blue sky. This vast landscape is but a tiny part of a fascinating continent, Africa. Today, we will not have a simple history lesson. We are going to embark on a great journey, backpack on our shoulders, through the different regions of this continent. We will cross humid tropical forests, endless savannas where herds graze, mountains with snowy peaks, and large modern metropolises that vibrate to the rhythm of life. Pan-Africanism is exactly that, an idea that travels. It is a movement that invites us to look at Africa not as a set of countries separated by borders drawn on a map, but as a land rich in diversity, united by a common history, shared struggles, and a flourishing culture. This word, Pan-Africanism, comes from the Greek pan, meaning wall, and Africanism, which refers to Africa. So it is the idea that all peoples of Africa and those of African origin scattered around the world, we speak of diaspora linked. They share roots, hopes, and the desire to build a better future together. To understand this movement, we must first remember that Africa's history is marked by terrible trials, such as the slave trade and colonization, which tore the continent apart. Men and women were torn from their lands, forcibly taken to distant lands. These events created very strong bonds between those who stayed and those who left. Pan-Africanism was born from this shared pain and the will to restore dignity and place to the African continent. It is a call for unity, solidarity, and rebirth. During this journey, we will explore how this idea emerged and how it was built over time, relying on travel stories, poems, and texts that tell us about Africa and its peoples. Get ready, departure is imminent. We will cross the desert, follow the coasts, and penetrate the heart of the forests to discover the multiple faces of Africa and the foundations of Pan-Africanism. Our first stop takes us to the north of the continent, where the largest hot desert in the world stretches, the Sahara. Imagine yourself walking with a caravan of camels, loaded with salt, gold, ivory, and precious fabrics. For centuries, these trade routes crossed the desert, linking North Africa to sub-Saharan Africa. They allowed exchanges not only of goods but also of ideas, beliefs, and cultures. Cities like Timbuktu in Mali became great intellectual and spiritual centers, where people came to study from afar. These exchanges show that before the arrival of Europeans, Africa was already a continent of circulations and connections.
Then today, the cultures of the Sahel bear the traces of these exchanges, in music, architecture, or cuisine. However, this era of prosperity was brutally interrupted by the arrival of Europeans on the African coasts. The routes of gold and salt were gradually supplanted by a much more sinister route, that of the triangular trade. Men, women, and children were captured inland, forcibly taken to the coast, then crammed into slave ships bound for the Americas. It was an immense tear. The Atlantic slave trade emptied entire regions of their population and broke societies. The stories of this time are heartbreaking. In the document 12 Years Slave.epub, we can read the story of a free man, Solomon Northup, who was kidnapped and enslaved. Although his story takes place in the United States, it reminds us of the fate of millions of Africans. The text describes the brutality and inhumanity of the slave system. He carried her back to the cream-tinted boudoir. This sentence, taken out of context, may seem trivial, but it evokes the violence of domination, the fact of treating a person like an object that one moves. The trade created an African diaspora, that is, a dispersion of African peoples around the world, mainly in America. These uprooted communities preserved elements of their original cultures, while developing new forms of expression, such as spirituals, blues, or jazz. Pan-Africanism was born in part from this shared awareness of exile and oppression. Thinkers and activists, first in the Caribbean and the United States, began to reflect on how to liberate Africa and restore its dignity. This movement gained momentum during the 19th and 20th centuries, leading to Pan-African conferences and congresses. The desert, which we crossed at the beginning of our journey, symbolizes both obstacles and connections. It reminds us that Africa has always been a space of circulation, but also a place of suffering. Understanding Pan-Africanism is first understanding this complex and painful geography. After crossing the desert, our journey takes us south, into the immense tropical forests of Central and West Africa. Here, the air is heavy and humid, the vegetation is lush. Giant trees form a vault that filters sunlight. Powerful rivers, like the Congo or the Niger, snake through the jungle, offering communication and survival routes. It is in these regions that many peoples developed brilliant civilizations, such as the kingdoms of Congo, Dahomey, or Ashanti. These societies were organized, with complex political systems, refined arts, and deep religious beliefs. European colonization, which followed the slave trade, attempted to destroy these cultures. The colonists imposed their languages, religions, and political systems.
Enses. The forest became a refuge, a place of memory. Travel stories, like those found in the document A Tramp Sketches. EPUB, show us another facet of Africa. The author, Stephen Graham, describes his wanderings along the Black Sea, but his approach as a vagabond, a tramp, reminds us of the importance of wandering, discovery, and encounter. He writes, "It is the life of the wanderer and seeker, the walking hermit, the rebel against modern conditions and commercialism who has gone out into the wilderness." This idea of rebelling against the modern world to find a deeper meaning resonates with Pan-Africanism. For Africans and descendants of Africans, it is about rebelling against the colonial and slave heritage, finding their roots, and building their own identity. The forests of Africa are also the scene of struggles for independence. Figures like Patrice Lumumba in Congo or Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana emerged from these regions. Pan-Africanism was a central ideology in decolonization movements. The idea was to unite to drive out the colonists and build strong, independent African states. The Conference of African Peoples, organized by Nkrumah in 1958 in Accra, brought together leaders from across the continent to discuss unity and liberation. Forests and rivers are therefore symbols of resistance and survival. They remind us that despite attempts at destruction, African cultures have endured and adapted. Pan-Africanism draws its strength from this ability to resist and be reborn. Our journey continues in the vast savannas of East and South Africa. Here, the landscape opens up, grassy plains as far as the eye can see, dotted with acacias and baobabs. Herds of wildebeest, zebras, and gazelles migrate with the seasons. In the distance, majestic mountains rise, like Kilimanjaro or Mount Kenya. These regions were the cradle of humanity. It is in the Rift Valley that the first hominids took their first steps. Africa is the continent of origins. This idea is fundamental to Pan-Africanism. It is about reminding the world that Africa is not a continent without history, but that it is, on the contrary, the starting point of the entire human adventure. The savannas were also the scene of fierce resistance against colonization. The Zulus, under the leadership of kings like Shaka or Cetshwayo, fought British and Boer colonists. The Maasai defended their lands against invaders. These struggles nurtured a sense of pride and dignity. In the second half of the 20th century, liberation movements in South Africa, Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and Mozambique used Pan-Africanism as a rallying cry. Nelson Mandela, an emblematic figure of the anti-apartheid struggle, is part of this tradition. African unity was a central goal.
Zation, ethnic and linguistic differences, political rivalries, and economic interests often hindered cooperation. Pan-Africanism is an ideal, but its implementation is complex. The mountains in this landscape symbolize the challenges to overcome. They represent the difficulty of unity, but also the possibility of reaching heights. The Pan-African dream is that of a united, free, and prosperous Africa. The poems and songs of the struggle, found in collections like African American Poetry. EPUB, express this hope. Even if the source document on African American poetry is different, it reflects the same quest for freedom and recognition. The voices of the diaspora, like those of Langston Hughes or Maya Angelou, sang of Africa and called for liberation. Their words crossed the ocean and inspired freedom fighters on the continent. Our journey ends in the great modern cities of Africa: Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, Accra, Dakar. These bustling metropolises reflect contemporary Africa. They are the scene of incredible cultural, economic, and political effervescence. There are skyscrapers, business centers, universities, museums, lively markets. Pan-Africanism has taken new forms today. It is no longer just about fighting colonization or apartheid. It is about building a common future. The African Union, AU, which succeeded the OAU in 2002, works for the integration of the continent. Projects like the African Continental Free Trade Area, AFCFTA, aim to create a single market for goods and services. Economic Pan-Africanism is a major issue. It is about developing trade between African countries, creating jobs, and reducing poverty. Cities are also places of artistic and intellectual creation. African literature, cinema, music, and fashion shine worldwide. Writers like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie or Wole Soyinka, musicians like Fela Kuti or Youssou N'Dour, filmmakers like Ousmane Sembène have contributed to spreading a positive and complex image of Africa. Cultural Pan-Africanism is essential. It is about reclaiming narratives, telling African history by Africans themselves. Ports, like those of Lagos or Mombasa, are points of connection with the rest of the world. They remind us that Africa has always been open to the outside, whether through trade or the tragedy of the slave trade. Today, the African diaspora continues to play an important role. Cooperation and exchange initiatives between Africa and its scattered communities are multiplying. Pan-Africanism is a living movement, constantly evolving. It is carried by a new generation of young Africans, connected and ambitious. Social networks, tech startups, citizen movements like Fees Must Fall or Bring Back Our Girls show that African youth is ready to take their destiny into their own hands.
An idea that has evolved over time, but remains fundamental. The unity and solidarity of African peoples and the diaspora are the key to building a future of peace, justice, and prosperity. To go further in our understanding of Pan-Africanism, it is interesting to examine the key figures who embodied this movement and the debates that crossed it. Among the pioneers, we can cite W.E.B. Du Bois, an African-American intellectual who organized the first Pan-African congresses in the early 20th century. He fought for equal rights and the end of colonization. Another important leader is Marcus Garvey, a Jamaican who advocated for the return of African Americans to Africa and the creation of a powerful African state. His slogan "Africa for the Africans" had immense resonance. On the continent, Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of independent Ghana, is a central figure of Pan-Africanism. He devised the necessity of a political union of Africa to counter imperialist domination. His book Africa Must Unite is a foundational text. Julius Nyerere in Tanzania also developed a socialist and Pan-African vision, based on unity and development. However, Pan-Africanism was not a unanimous movement. Divergences appear between those who advocated immediate political unity, the Unionists, and those who thought that nation-states should first be strengthened before considering a federation, the Gradualists. The conflict between Nkrumah and other leaders like Félix Houphouët-Boigny of Côte d'Ivoire illustrates this debate. Houphouët-Boigny favored progressive economic cooperation, while Nkrumah wanted rapid political union. Today, Pan-Africanism faces new challenges. Globalization, economic inequalities, armed conflicts, climate change, and the COVID-19 pandemic have highlighted the continent's fragilities. Issues of sovereignty, governance, and sustainable development are at the heart of discussions. Critics of Pan-Africanism sometimes point to the risk of glorifying an imaginary Africanity, ignoring internal diversities and conflicts. Others believe that the African Union lacks means and political will to impose its decisions. Despite these difficulties, the Pan-African idea remains a powerful source of inspiration. It is invoked in struggles for social justice, democracy, and human rights. The Black Lives Matter movement, which emerged in the United States, has resonated in Africa and revived discussions on the links between the diaspora and the continent. Deepening Pan-Africanism also involves the study of African languages, literatures, and philosophies. It is about decolonizing knowledge and recognizing Africa's contribution to world civilization. The journey we have undertaken is therefore not over.
Cert, forest, savanna, sit and associate each with important events or figures of Pan-Africanism. For example, with the desert, you can associate trade routes and the slave trade; with the forest, pre-colonial kingdoms and resistance; with the savanna, struggles for independence; with the city, contemporary Pan-Africanism. Next, use the imaginary journey technique. When you study a subject, close your eyes and try to visualize yourself in the place and time concerned. Imagine yourself discussing with a leader like Nkrumah or walking down a street in Lagos. This makes history more vivid. To remember dates and names, make flashcards. On one side, write the name or date, on the other, a short explanation. For example, OAU 1963 on the front, an Organization of African Unity, founded to promote solidarity among African states on the back. Review them regularly. Finally, discuss what you have learned with your classmates or family. Explaining a concept to someone else is an excellent way to master it. Ask yourself questions: why is Pan-Africanism important? What are the challenges of African unity? How can I, at my level, contribute to a better understanding of Africa? Remember that history and geography are living sciences. They help us understand today's world and imagine tomorrow's SAP. If you wish to deepen your knowledge of Pan-Africanism, here are some leads. You can read books like Africa Must Unite by Kwame Nkrumah, The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, or So Long a Letter by Mariama Ba. These works are classics of African thought. For a more contemporary approach, the novels of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, like Americana, explore the links between Africa and the diaspora. The documentary Concerning Violence by Goran Olsen, based on the writings of Frantz Fanon, is an excellent introduction to decolonization struggles. Online, you can consult the websites of the African Union and the Foundation for African Renaissance. YouTube channels like Afro Legacy or Home Team History offer accessible videos on African history. Feel free to listen to podcasts like the Africa Podcast or Le Pan-Africanism and Questions. Finally, participate in African cultural events in your city, film festivals, concerts, exhibitions. The best way to understand Pan-Africanism is to immerse yourself in African cultures. Here are some open-ended questions to fuel your reflection. How can Pan-Africanism help solve Africa's current problems, such as poverty or conflicts? What is the role of the African diaspora in the continent's development? How can African unity be reconciled with the diversity of cultures and languages? Is Pan-Africanism a political, economic, or cultural project? In